It's been 7 weeks since I have bought a book. I am on the Read What You Own challenge, and I am holding steady. Hello, welcome to my channel, another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and this is week 7 of my Read What You Own challenge, where I have challenged myself to read 25,000 pages of books that I already own before buying another book. This is a slight modification to the previous 3 years where I did the 100 book challenge, where I challenged myself to read 100 books that I already owned before buying another book. And this year, the creator of this event, the evil mastermind, Criminale, with his other co-hosts, myself, MJ at Reading This Life, and Crystal at Fiber Artsy, we made a modification to allow page counts. We consider an average book to be about 250 pages long. I will include a link to a video I made which has all the rules and descriptions of how this challenge is working. But I am doing the 25,000 pages. So how many pages have I read in the 7th week? The first book I finished was an audiobook, The Wolf Den by Elodie Harper. It is 423 pages in the print edition. This is an historical novel set in Pompeii. It starts off and it says, year 71 AD. If you know your history, you know that a major event will be happening in Pompeii in not too many years. And this is the story of a slave woman working in a brothel. She used to be the educated daughter of a doctor, but that doctor died early. His family was on hard times, and she was sold off as a concubine. And the man they sold her to, his wife, did not like her husband having a concubine, so she sold her off as a slave woman to a brothel. And that's where she is now working. This is actually some pretty good historical fiction. It is not first-person narration, but it's damn close to it as you learn about this woman's life as a slave prostitute and her efforts to rise herself above that situation. I think this is a pretty fantastic book of historical fiction. There are times when I would have liked just a little more historical detail, but I think there's enough historical detail to make this a pretty darn good book. It is also the first of a trilogy, and I will definitely be finishing or getting the second book in the trilogy on my Audible account. Now, the only issue I have with this book is at the very end. There are a number of storylines which the author forces them together in a single conclusion. And I know why she did that, because the main character had to be distracted by one merging storyline fighting with another storyline, while the third storyline is happening just out of her reach, and she's too busy to do anything about that other storyline. Horrific conclusion. But that's a minor detail. As I said, I will be reading the second book. A few weeks ago, I read a story on the internet about the authenticity of bodies found in the ruins of Pompeii. Supposedly, there was a woman found covering the body of a child in these ruins. And why I have not finished either of the other 2 books in this series, I strongly suspect or anticipate that this story is going to lead to those 2 bodies found, because the main character is, of course, a woman, a prostitute, who is rising up in the Pompeii world. And I just think that historical find is going to mix in with the fiction of this story. I can't prove that yet until I read the other two books. On my Kindle, I read All the Fiends of Hell by Adam Nevill, 393 pages in the print edition. I have read 3 other books by Adam Nevill, The Ritual, The Reddening, and Cunning Folk. All those 3 books were very good, and All the Fiends of Hell is also a pretty darn good horror novel. It starts off in contemporary UK, someplace in London. There is some sort of pandemic going on, sort of like COVID. And there is a British man. He's not really a very talented British man. He's your run-of-the-mill Joe. Nothing special about him. And he comes down with this case of this flu-like disease, and he is out flat for a number of days. He is divorced, so he lives alone. So he just is in his home suffering through this disease and its symptoms. When he recovers from the symptoms, he notices that everyone, or nearly everyone, in the UK has disappeared. And he doesn't know where to. He looks outside his house, and all his neighbors' doors are open, and nobody is in these homes, except for the physically disabled old woman who was taking care, or his daughter was taking care of her mother. She's still there because she can't get out of bed on her own. So something very strange has happened. And there are monsters that are starting to show up in this world, devoid of people. No, I'll leave it at that. One of the things that Adam Nevill does very well in this book is he focuses on a story with very few characters. This British man is essentially it. There are some side characters. There are some children that he finds that are alive who are also sick with this flu. They are disturbed because their mother and father are gone. So he sort of starts taking care of them, and then he meets a nasty man, also alive. I'll leave it at that. Very intriguing storyline, very well done. I would rank this as the second favorite book of Adam Nevill that I read. I do prefer The Ritual to All Fiends of Hell, just a little, but if you are not familiar with this author's work, he is an author you should pick up if you like horror novels. I am also on a mission to reread some of the great works of nonfiction, so I picked up Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. I originally read this in the late 90s. This is part memoir of the author's experience in Auschwitz and other concentration camps during World War II, and his creation of a psychology known as logotherapy that comes out of his experience in these concentration camps. Essentially, logos is Greek for meaning, and Viktor Frankl is saying that in order for a human to survive, he or she needs to have meaning in life. And even if you were in a concentration camp, you could find meaning for life. Part of his was his hopes to be reunited with his wife after he got out of his camp. And this meaning can change from person to person. I did enjoy very much the descriptions of his life in a concentration camp. Well, enjoy is probably not the best word to use there, but I appreciated his descriptions. Now, his psychology, logotherapy, I'm a little on the edge about that, not quite buying everything he has to say, but still, this is a work of nonfiction that most people should probably pick up sometime in their lives. Vin at Revenant Reads has started an event this year. It is called The Ghosts of Christmas Past, and it is to revive an old tradition where people used to tell each other ghost stories over the Christmas season. The ghost stories don't necessarily have to be about Christmas. You're just telling people ghost stories because people love ghost stories. And I love ghost stories. So the idea of this event is to read ghost stories over the Christmas holidays. There were some prompts that you could follow. I'm not really following those prompts myself, but I am going to read some ghost stories. And the ghost story I finished this week was an audio story. It is The Empty House by Arlington Blackwood. This is not quite a Victorian ghost story. It was published in 1906. So it misses that era just by a bit. But it is the story of a young man and his aunt, and they go investigating an empty house because the house is supposed to be haunted by ghosts. Very atmospheric. You get this feel of wandering into an old house where strange things are going on. Now, Arlington Blackwood is one of the most famous early American horror authors. He was a big influence on H.P. Lovecraft. And I have this series of stories that I took out from the library on audiobook, and I really should make an attempt to listen to more, but I think I'm going to switch over to M.R. James' ghost stories for later this week. I am also participating in Cthulhu Christmas. This is an event that I created with my buddy Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics, and it is just a chance for people to read the stories of H.P. Lovecraft or other stories in the Cthulhu mythos over the Christmas holiday, and more importantly, to read a horror or Cthulhu story on Christmas Day. It's not Christmas Day yet, but this week I read a short story, The Black Stone by Robert E. Howard. Robert E. Howard is more famously known for his fantasy creation, Conan the Barbarian. But The Black Stone is a pure horror story. A young man, or a scholarly man, hears of a stone. It's somewhere, I think, in Romania, somewhere that's very hard to get to. Now, this was written in 1926, so his remote areas are really, really remote because there is a black stone, this obelisk with strange writings and something on top of that stone. A really good addition to the Cthulhu mythos stories. Also, for Cthulhu Christmas, I picked up H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu by Gao Tanabe. Gao Tanabe is a Japanese manga illustrator, and this is the illustrated version of Lovecraft's story, The Call of Cthulhu. For the most part, I think Gao Tanabe did a really fantastic job showing Lovecraft's story in pictorial art form. I do have a slight problem with his illustration of the main narrator. I'll see if I can show you a picture of that. Kind of hard to tell in this picture, but he's a long-haired, sort of effeminate character in the illustration, and I don't think it quite worked that well. But other than that, I was highly impressed. If you know the Lovecraft story, you know there's a couple of different storylines in this short story, and Gao Tanabe shows them very well. I got to remember to hold it in the right side. This is manga. His last section where there's this ship in the middle of the sea that finally encounters the great Cthulhu. I have read at least three other books by this author in the manga form, and I hope he produces more. There is one about the short story The Hound that I need to get, because they're really fun to read. I am motoring right along with my reading of Against the Day by Thomas Pynchon. This is a group read that I'm doing, again, with Alan at Big Hard Books and Classics. Against the Day is a book that Alan says is probably his favorite novel of all time. I did listen to the audiobook back in 2006, and now I'm reading the actual text while listening to the audiobook again. I am about 488 pages in, and I still don't know if there's a coherent story in here. I don't remember it from the time I listened to the audiobook, but there's something captivating about the writing of Thomas Pynchon. I'm still enjoying it. I will continue. I am also reading the short stories of Jorge Luis Borges. This week I read 2 short stories. It was The Lottery of Babylon and A Survey of the Works of Herbert Quinn. Now, the Library of Babylon is a famous story of this mythic place where everything is ruled by a lottery. It describes on how this lottery just started off as a normal lottery where you could win some extra cash, but then it was determined that who ruled the town, who ruled the people, should be determined by lottery. You can, anything can happen to you in this lottery at the end. And it is, I think, just a way of looking at the gambling life. I don't particularly like to gamble. Games of chance have no appeal to me whatsoever. And what is horrifying in this story is that some people really love games of chance. And I could see a civilization arising where your entire life and your entire country was ruled by a lottery. The second story, the Survey of the Works of Herbert Quinn, focuses on something that Jorge Luis Borges does very well. Borges often lamented that he had great ideas for novels, but writing novels is rather a long, drawn-out process. It can take quite some time. So he decided to take these novels in his head and write short stories about them, as if these novels actually existed. And in this one, there is a novel called The Gods of the Labyrinth, or The Labyrinth of a God, something like that, where it has multiple storylines. You have an opening chapter, and then you have 2 second chapters. And in these second chapters, the story goes off in different directions. And then from those 2 second chapters, you have additional chapters that branch off after the second, and so forth, until you have this labyrinth of a novel. I kind of wish Borges had written this novel, or someone would write a novel like that, because it's something I could really get into. Okay, that is the end of my reading week. How did I do on my total page counts? I read 1,500 pages. This brings me to a total of 9,272 pages finished for my challenge. And if my math is right, I am now at 37.9% complete on my challenge. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.